Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. So I recently made a video covering my thoughts on the first act of Echoes. During that video, I stated that the biggest missed opportunity of the act was that they didn't show off how the Vex have changed, and they didn't talk about why that matters. There is a lot of discussion of it, of course, which is what we're going to be going over today, but at no point do we actually get to see the Vex playing out the conflict at the heart of their radial area. So today, I wanted to talk about the new rising threat of the Choral Vex, how they differ from normal Vex, and why their emergence is so strange for the whole of the system at large. The first thing to note is that these changes seem to only be happening at current to Nessus's local Vex population, but it's worth remembering that the Vex are all linked by their structures and their network and their collective. Whilst this new faction and state of being for the Vex might start on Nessus, it's likely not going to stay that way forever. I'm also going to assume that you've all seen the changes that I am referring to when I talk about the Choral Vex. They have a single unifying feature that cuts them apart from most other Vex, which is the presence of a circular holographic band around the structure that closely is analogous to their neck on each of their units. Osiris has used the term yoke to refer to these holographic circles. But aesthetics are not the only things that have changed for these Vex. In fact, it's really the most minor of changes. The bigger changes to them are the fact that their drive is now completely in opposition of what Vex typically are. To put it really simply, these Vex now don't act like Vex at all. So, to get a better idea of why and how and what all of that looks like, I suppose we should define how Vex normally act. We should also probably talk about what a Vex is under normal circumstances. Little bit of a lore summary for you. When you look at a Vex, you will obviously just see the robotic frame, but I'm sure that most of you who aren't uninitiated to the lore will know that these are not the true Vex. The white radiolarian fluid at their center is the true form of the Vex. These are microscopic silicon-based life forms. You know the radiolite samples you gather in Breach executable? Well, that's what Vex looks like more closely. The samples are still vast in comparison to the actual tiny microscopic size of actual radial area, but the point stands. That's a much closer representation of what a Vex looks like than any of the robotic frames that you encounter. Despite how tiny the Vex are, they work as a collective. This is the term for the entirety of the Vex, every single one of them. Within that collective, the general aim is roughly the same: victory. The Vex desire to survive and to be the final victors at the end of the universe, the only thing left at the end of time. This is likely a result of their initial stages of existence, and their potential origin in the game of existence played by the Gardener and the Winnower before time began. The Vex were the pattern that were most successful in that game, referred to as the Flower Game, and so they essentially perfectly evolved to become the eventual victors against all other forms of life. When they escaped from the Flower Game and when the universe began, their primal patterns fell into reality. And, well, that's how the Vex supposedly began. How they achieve that victory, though, is what varies, because even within the collective there are different groups. Vex can generally be broken down into subtypes, with each different subtype being governed in a hierarchical manner by its Axis Minds. All units beneath those Axis Minds are subservient to their whims and will follow their Axis Minds without hesitation. So does that mean that every single Vex unit is pursuing the same strategy across a billion worlds and across a bunch of different subtypes? Well, no, even though the end goal is the same, the way in which all those different subtypes go about achieving that goal is bound to be very different, and that does mean that those strategies will sometimes be brought into conflict with each other. However, in most of those instances, Vex will not fight each other. It is a freakish aberration for that kind of conflict to actually arise between different Vex units. In the vast majority of cases, when Vex factions find themselves in opposition to one another, they will choose to simply ignore one another and go about their own plans, leaving the others alone, giving them a bit of deference. This can be seen by factions of Vex giving the Sol Divisive a very wide berth whenever and wherever they are found. We'll talk more about the Sol Divisive in a bit, but for context, their plans are very different from the rest of the Vex, hence why they're generally avoided. Returning to the general idea of what the Vex are though, it's worth noting that individual Vex units have no personality as best we can tell. No individuality, no drive, no dreams. They simply exist to survive and persist within their collective and to obey the laws of the pattern. They're about as mindless as one can imagine, but in aggregate they represent an intelligence that far exceeds everything in the system, everything potentially in the universe. They have plans that literally reach millions of years into the future with untold trillions of different permutations according to what might happen, all of which have been simulated down to the T. So, yeah, the Vex are a lot. They're kind of that typical unfeeling, robotic, horrifying menace from beyond the stars that is incredibly alien and yet also understandable through the lens of a completely indomitable conqueror. So how are the Choral Vex different? Well, you still have the Radiolarian mines, but the structuring of it all is very different. You see, there is still a hierarchy in place for these Vex, but it's a leadership caste of one, the enemy that was unveiled by Saint 14, the so-called Conductor. This again links in with the idea that these are called the Choral Vex. The word choral here is referring to the Vex being in a chorus, in a symphony together, and being a part of something bigger that is also harmonious. But it doesn't stop there, because aside from the Conductor's overwhelming presence, the Vex at base, weirdly enough, all seem to have more personality and individuality within the choral faction of Vex. Take a listen to this note from Failsafe and Saint 14.
Fire team, your data is secure.
Huh, that's weird.
It is not weird. The Guardian does not fail.
No, I mean, normally Vex procedures trickle down from the top minds, you know? But these are all talking to each other instead.
I see. That is strange. We cannot rely on bringing them down by cutting off the head, then. No matter. We have enough fists for them all.
So these Vex units are communicating back and forth with each other when normally they would just get their orders from on high via the Axis mines. This individuality that can be observed within the Choral Vex is also seen in another instance, where we actually have to face off against a boss within Breach Executable, a boss that has literally given itself a title, namely the Guardian Slayer.
A Vex mine is redirecting forces to your location, Captain. It has given itself a name, the Guardian Slayer. How bold!
To be unbelievably clear, the Vex do not do this. Even when the Martyr Mind was created, a mind within the Vex of the Infinite Forest that was responsible solely for capturing Saint 14's light, a very personal unit of Vex, which is not typical for them at all, but was made in response to the greatest threat they know? Yeah, even with that thing's creation, it was still just like every other Vex, detached and ambivalent to its role, simply carrying it out according to the orders of any Vex mind above it. The Vex are dispassionate in the way they carry out their programming, even when it concerns an individual. So for a Vex to literally ascribe itself a role and a title implies a bunch of stuff about that Vex. Stuff that is not typical to the Vex. That Vex unit from the Choral faction has, at bare minimum, a sense of individual purpose, given that it has given itself that title reflecting that purpose. And then, it swears at you?
That Vex mind just called you a... profanity restricted. Wow, I would be outraged and retaliate with violence.
Now, sure, let's go ahead and just acknowledge that could just be a little bit of tongue-in-cheek by Failsafe, and this could just be the developers having a bit of fun. That being said, I don't know, because this is also the first time a Vex gave itself a title that implies a purpose. So I'm not so sure if Failsafe is joking here. Let's also assume for just a second that Failsafe is being serious for a second, and suddenly that puts the Choral Vex apart even more, because it means not only do the Vex have individuality to the point where they can define their own purpose, but also it shows that they have a degree of emotional intelligence. If it's trying to get a rise out of us, it shows a little guile. If it's actually swearing at us because it's angry, that shows the raw emotion of anger itself. And that's not something the Vex generally demonstrate. Even though their name means to anger or to create hatred, the Vex themselves, they're very dispassionate about a lot of things. Even down to the ultimate victory that they want to achieve, Vex, generally speaking, are not emotional about a lot of things. And again, all of this is happening to an individual Vex unit. That is not normal. These things are part of a greater whole, not individuals with hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Osiris also noted that the code of the Choral Vex is fundamentally different from the code of other Vex, because it seemingly has adapted and evolved itself. What spurred that evolution wasn't known at the beginning, but, inevitably it comes from the Conductor and their acquisition of the Echo, which hasn't been confirmed yet in the story, but come on, we know what's happening here. Appropriately for the villain known as the Conductor, we also see Vex data being rearranged in a musical manner. It's literally being rearranged into musical clefs instead of their standard units of data. Almost as though the chorus of the Choral Vex is singing in a greater harmony. It's not totally clear why that's the case, but I have a good theory, something that I'm going to talk about in the next few weeks. All of the musical metaphors used to describe the Choral Vex are best summarized by what Failsafe states about them here.
Initially, the Vex responded with their usual exoplanetary impact protocol, but then a new signal emerged. Still Vex, but distinct.
Distinct? In what way?
Limited analysis indicates it's an alternate tessellation of the radiolarial substrate.
Put it simply, I may have spent centuries in the Infinite Forest, but I'm still a Titan.
It's the same old song, but a new voice singing in a different key.
Is there some kind of corruption in the system? A cascading failure?
The opposite. It's emergent behavior. The machine version of rebelling against authority.
Same old tune, but someone else is pulling the strings, someone else is doing the singing, sung in a different key. The idea of the machines rebelling against authority. The note about rebellion here is actually the most important part of all of it. Because, yeah, this is exactly what the Choral Vex are doing. They are rebelling against the typical structures of the Vex that have been set in place for millennia untold. Protocols that governed unending victory in an existence before time even began, if rumors and lore are to be believed. The Vex are ancient survivors, hell-bent on being the last thing alive at the end of all things. They have turned stars into forges to create more of the base elements that they need to build out their structures and frames, the empire unending that they have been creating for billions of years. They have turned entire planets into prediction engines to reach that end goal of theirs more effectively, and under the right circumstances they have created fortresses within the stars like the Vault of Glass that can alter the fabric of time itself. This is what success for the Vex looks like. It is success built on the pattern that they follow, a pattern where everything must conform to the Vex or be destroyed. Where the Vex go, only the eternal pattern of them exists. Either you get more Vex, or you get death. And yet, now the Choral Vex are here, and instead of the Vex changing the universe around them, they are the ones who are changing. It seems that clear lines have been drawn now as a result of this. Two factions on Nessus have emerged within the Vex collective. The Choral faction that is armed with the paracausal power of the Echo that fell to Nessus and now which serves at the whims of the Conductor, and the normal Vex, which are still following their same patterns that have borne them through millennia's worth of changes in the universe, and which have proved victorious every time with the exception of battles against paracausal foes, such as ourselves or Oryx. And now the Choral Vex are slowly starting to take over, turning Nessus into a place wholly unrecognizable from its past. This has gone far enough that Osiris has confirmed the Vex are in open conflict with themselves beneath the surface. The result is chaos.
For a moment, it felt as if Nessus meant to swallow your fire team whole. The very ground radiates Vex influence. Code written into the stone as prophecy. And the mountains kneel.
Get me off this ride! Am I right? When the Vex Vex took Nessus, it was like a well-organized renovation disaster. But now, they're just duking it out in the streets. What gives?
Such is the question. I've rarely seen Vex factions in conflict. But this is chaos. Perhaps the data will make some sense of it.
The battle is going on beneath our feet as we speak. As it turns out, this is part of what we learn from the radiolarian geysers that are shooting out of Nessus's core. The entrenched data within those geysers gives us an idea of the Vex being in conflict.
Captain, supercharged radiolaria from deep within Nessus is about to breach the crust.
Find it and siphon what we can. Carefully. There's a battle of assimilation raging beneath us. The data here can tell us where and how it is being fought.
The battle for control of the Vex on Nessus is also clearly being won by the Choral faction, but it now appears that Nessus is only the start of it all. Breach Executable has an event where you'll be able to see a signal beaming into deep space. It's the one where you use the Vex craniums to connect to the different laser lines. At this point, you can hear dialogue that states that the Vex of the Choral faction are reaching out to the Collective to try and take over them as well, which cannot be good.
Data stream broadcast detected leaving Nessus. Who are they talking to? Why do it like this?
Are the Vex? They aren't even trying to conceal the source. Why not make contact through their own internal networks? No matter. Intercept it, and perhaps we shall have our answers.
The Vex have begun emitting another data stream, now with more encryption.
The last signal we intercepted was reaching out to the Collective. We must ensure they remain disconnected from the greater network. Go.
And what's more, in defiance of the way that Vex typically organize, where they will see themselves as remaining the same whilst the rest of the universe changes to their whims and becomes more Vex, now the Vex are experimenting on themselves and changing themselves as they go. Take a listen to the audio that plays when you do the Gestating Pods event in Breach Executable.
Each of these growths is a petri dish of mutating radiolaria. There is no timeline in which the Vex experimenting on themselves ends well for us.
And that means it is apple-picking time, Captain.
Another tree. Failsafe. Are there simulations running in those data pods?
None at all, Safe Unit. Only rabid, mutated radiolaria specimens that provide data.
Notice how the nursery Cyclops in each event is always marked with the symbol of the Choral Vex. So the changes to the Vex are again being enforced by that faction, not the original Vex. All of this combines into what I think is the biggest point of the story and the biggest point of the entire episode, which is simply the idea that the Vex are changing. And to give you an idea of the gravity of that statement, it is the biggest evolution of the Vex in Destiny's history, and in their own in-canon history. And I know that sounds like a big statement made in hyperbole, but really, hold with me and think about it for a second, okay? The Vex have never once deviated from their pattern. It's always about the pattern. It enforces every aspect of their behavior. It determines everything they do. Even the Soul Divisive, the Vex of the Black Garden, turned to worship of the Witness out of realization that if the Witness won, then they would at least still exist as a part of the final shape, and their pattern might not necessarily follow their original form, but they would still be the victors at the end of the shape. Because following the pattern is victory, and victory is the pattern. It's the pattern, it's the pattern, it's the pattern. The pattern has always been at the core of it all. And the Choral Vex do not follow the pattern. Now they have been fundamentally altered. That has literally never happened in Destiny's history, and if lore is to be believed, these entities sat beneath the Winnower and the Gardener. Saint 14 makes the commentary that we're in a new age after the defeat of the Witness. If the Choral Vex persist, then that statement will certainly hold true for the Vex at large. If they spread to the rest of the Collective, we have no idea what the Vex will do, because they will be changing for the first time in their history. This is why I think this still has the potential to be an interesting story, and why I want to know more about what the MO of the Conductor is. That being said, with all that change upon us, watch what is happening to the Choral Vex. It seems like it's in the background right now, but they are currently the long arm of their master, playing to the Conductor's tune. Whoever they are, we need to be aware of them, their power and their motivations. They are ascending to a position of power over one of the most formidable forces in the entire universe, an army unending if they should desire it, a machine engine capable of reshaping entire systems if they should demand it, and something that could scupper out the light of the universe if they should merely muse it. There is one other thing, one last little thing too. The music. There are references to it everywhere in this new faction, from their name as the Choral Vex, as in part of a chorus, to the name of their leader being the Conductor, to even how they organize their data in clefs. There's music behind all of it. And when the time is right, I think I'll talk more about the Conductor, the music, and the potential of what is going on behind the scenes. For now though, keep an eye on this story, and do watch out. There are spoilers about. Yeah, spoilers for Act 2 have already leaked. Do not get caught up in them. There's a lot going on, and we're about to see a lot more crazy change, I bet. With that being said, that's our video for today. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and leave a like, and if you have your own thoughts on the Choral Vex, go ahead and leave them down below in the comments section. It could be that I'm looking at this from a completely different perspective. Do you think the Choral Vex is an interesting story arc to follow? What do you reckon happens when these crazy machines gain a degree of autonomy and personality, and have that just be part of who they are for an extended period of time? Is this how eventually one day we make peace with certain members of the Vex? Is this a way that we end up communicating with people lost in the network? Let me know your thoughts, I'm keen to hear them. Also, if you want more Destiny lore content, go ahead and hit subscribe, and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Por Audacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.